Welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, September 19th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about a Fox News poll that they released last evening showing Kamala Harris with a 2-point lead over former President Donald Trump, a margin here that is actually the largest for Vice President Harris in a series of Fox News polls that they have been conducting since the month of July, right around the time at which there was conversation in swapping out Kamala Harris as the nominee for vice president, or rather president. She hasn't actually led Donald Trump in any substantive poll from Fox News up until today, where she takes a 2-point lead nationally. But this 2-point lead really does bury what we actually want to understand about this Fox News poll. The great thing about the Fox News poll is that they do release these crosstab data points. They tell us a bit about how Democrats are voting, Republicans are voting, but what I'm focused on today is how independent voters are voting. And what we find here is actually quite fascinating. At face value, a 2-point lead for Kamala Harris isn't all that impressive, but it's certainly something that is fascinating when it comes down to Fox News' methodology, especially as an A-rated pollster. Many Republicans have been pointing to a number of their polls from Insider Advantage and other groups that are Republican aligned that show Donald Trump in the advantage nationwide. They're so caught up in this idea that he's still running against Joe Biden, but they are losing when it comes down to high-quality A and B-rated pollsters that show one thing consistently: Kamala Harris is in the advantage. But it is, again, these crosstabs and these individual data points when it comes down to independent voters, not Democrats, not Republicans, but independent voters that are showing back in August when they did this same exact poll of Vice President Harris and Governor Tim Walz against Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. What did they find? Donald Trump won amongst independents by 8 points nationwide. Today, she wins by 12. A 20-point net swing that results in Donald Trump being up against Kamala Harris, to Kamala Harris now leading the former president. This 20-point swing isn't just happening right now in the Fox News poll. This is happening really in a number of really high-quality polls we are seeing across battleground states and on the national average. What you see in states like Pennsylvania is that Kamala Harris, on the Real Clear Politics average, really didn't have a lead over the past 2 weeks. But now she leads by roughly a point. And a new poll, what we're seeing from Quinnipiac University, has her up by 6. And in a number of good polls across other states, for instance, Wisconsin is a great example where we can look at Democrats up by 1.2%. They're maintaining their average. But impressively enough, in Michigan, they're expanding their margin, bringing Kamala Harris to the highest percentage vote share she has ever been in this cycle. And like I was saying, on the national level, the Fox News poll doesn't just exist on its own, right? ABC News and Ipsos has Harris up by 4, and if they were using the likely voter screen, they would have Harris up by 6. Real Clear Politics skews these polls away from the Democratic Party too, and I will say that, and I've been saying it for about 3 years now. It's very, very clear that members of their team very much hold right-wing advantages, but at the same time, Real Clear Politics is still a reputable site. To an extent, I would say I use it to understand a bit about what they're putting out, about what looking at the polls and just getting direct links to PDFs and to reports that are coming from the pollsters. And so I will say, sure, I do give them that, but I will find too, the Fox News poll going into this average here comes in with a lot of other polls that are showing Kamala Harris doing really well. And so I think what I've come to understand about the Fox News poll is that independent voters driving these numbers really does show that Kamala Harris, since that debate and since the Democratic convention, has made major inroads amongst groups and demographic bases that maybe weren't necessarily all in for her before. Donald Trump had the majority of swing state voters back in August. Now, not swing state voters, rather independent voters. Now, he does not. And that is the case actually for swing state voters. Now, he does not. But the point is, a 20-point net swing, we have to really unpack that. And so I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the Fox News poll. What they tell us is that, they ask about motivation. They ask about how people would vote. That's the second question they ask. And again, you can see the trend line here. Now, ignore a lot of these data points. They really just have to do this because they like to show comparison. But these are all data points from 2019. That's what the 19 signifies. And so I would ignore everything before the 24 when it was getting serious that Kamala Harris could be swapping out Joe Biden as the presidential nominee. But when it was first being discussed back in March, this was around the time of the State of the Union and around the time about, Dean Phillips entering into the race and all these conversations. Should Joe Biden be the nominee? Democrats initially decided maybe it's time for somebody new, but then said, you know what, we're going to stick with him. And so at that point, Kamala Harris was about 6 points behind former President Trump. He didn't have a running mate, granted, so this was a different circumstance, but she was down 6 points. Then came July. This was after the debate. This was after Joe Biden had a debate performance that he himself described as a terrible, terrible evening. Donald Trump led Kamala Harris then by 1 point across the country. Then the swap out actually came. And Democrats were hoping this Fox News poll would show something meaningful, right? It came at a time where we were seeing Tim Walz as VP, excitement and enthusiasm on the Democratic side. And yet, Fox News poll shows Donald Trump had the advantage. Now, Kamala Harris leads by 2 points, again driven by a swing not amongst Democrats and not amongst Republicans, but amongst independent voters. Independent voters. Now, Fox News also is A-rated for a reason, but they do provide other data points that, again, provide us indications of why people might be now backing Kamala Harris before versus previously, right? When it comes down to how people view Kamala Harris, her numbers here did, in fact, dip a little bit amongst likely voters from 2020, but it's still a lot better than where she was before she was officially the nominee. You can see her approval rating amongst likely voters was just 44% in July. This is when she was vice president and not the Democratic nominee. But then almost immediately after, in August, her approval rating went up to 48%, with a net average of -3. It went from -10 to -3. Now, it's just -2. And it's a trend line here that is actually quite good for Kamala Harris. Donald Trump is down 9 points nationwide. In fact, while that may not be something that is too much of a change from 2020, it still matters, because in August, he was down just 6. Now he's down 9. Things are in a different state, and Fox News is capturing that. And that's exactly what the swing state polls are capturing. That's exactly what the national political betting market odds are capturing. Voters are turning away from Trump, even if previously it seemed like they were going back to him. Now, don't get me wrong. This race has always been close, and it will continue to be close. But it is the performances like Donald Trump's debate performance that makes voters shy away from backing him, especially those independents who are genuinely concerned about the future of this nation and are trying to make a decision. When Donald Trump gets on the debate stage and accuses Haitian immigrants of eating cats and dogs with no proof, besides the fact that J.D. Vance is saying he's getting 2 constituent calls out of thousands that are saying this is happening, and you can't find anybody in city leadership, in statewide leadership, who has evidence for this claim, what you are finding is that voters sour on that. When Donald Trump goes to the debate stage and says, "I am proud to be the one who overturned Roe v. Wade," voters sour on that. Abortion was an issue in 2022, but we are now going to see the full force of it in a presidential election in 2024. Because Kamala Harris has been right about one thing, and so has her campaign, is that they came into this race as the underdogs. Even though Democrats have enthusiasm on their end, they have been trailing in these battleground state polls for months on end. I mean, you can take a look at the Trump versus Biden data points. They weren't good for numbers in these battleground states. Donald Trump, when it came down to a number of these states, you can see Trump versus Biden polls in Arizona. Trump led Biden in Arizona by 7.7%. Think about that for a moment. Today, when you take a look at Arizona, Trump versus Harris, you see that in these battlegrounds, we can go ahead and pull it up because I think it's fascinating. Trump wins by 1.6%. Okay, it's an advantage, but it is not nearly the advantage that was given to Trump with a 7.7% lead, with a 10-point lead, according to Emerson, right before Biden dropped out. When you take a look at Nevada, another example, Trump led by 5. Right now, Nevada, Harris leads. This is something that was really a problem for Democrats across the country. Michigan, Kamala Harris leads by 2. Donald Trump led by 2. And so you again understand that Kamala Harris may have made major improvements, but she's by no means in a position where this is a slam dunk election. But a 20-point shift amongst independents shows it's moving absolutely in the right direction. I think this is something, too, that the Trump base never really was expecting to be part of their winning coalition until Joe Biden did a very bad debate performance, right? Independent voters were never really this, grouping in amongst the Trump base that they thought was going to be why they won the election. There wasn't as much persuasion when they were running against Biden. It was all about maximizing your base's turnout and depressing Democratic turnout. And for a while, it looked like that was going to work. That's why Donald Trump chose J.D. Vance. If he was choosing someone for the sake of electability, he shouldn't have chosen someone who was underperforming him in 2022, despite an 8-point shift nationally from 2020. And J.D. Vance does 2 points worse than Trump in Ohio. And every other down-ballot Republican wins Ohio by double digits, and J.D. Vance is stuck here at just over 5%. Donald Trump chose J.D. Vance because he wanted to leave a legacy about Make America Great Again. He wanted to leave a legacy of setting up the future Republican nominee for president of the United States and potentially the future Republican president of the United States. And the reason why that matters to Trump is because a lot of what this has been in the decisions he has made as to who he endorses into the campaign stops he makes, like the one he did yesterday in New York. In the decisions his campaign has made, all of this has been about maximizing their base and just going with the flow. But up until Kamala Harris's candidacy, that was because their opponent, Joe Biden, didn't seem to be gaining much in the polls. Democrats were spending tens of millions of dollars to change the way people thought about this race, and yet they didn't. Joe Biden was still routinely unpopular, and voters weren't all of a sudden persuaded to vote for him in 2024. And that's a big reason why he decided to drop out. But now, they are certainly persuaded by Vice President Harris, and they are excited by her too. And independent voters are showing that. Donald Trump against Joe Biden more than likely could have won based on his base's turnout. That's what we talked about too in length, right? That Joe Biden was not the favorite to win the election. He was probably going to have the worst Democratic performance of any Democrat in the 21st century, given where the election was after the debate. And so it made sense that he decided to depart the race. At the same time, now Democrats are in a different ballgame, where they aren't worried about, just winning over that Democratic base that they saw bleeding when Biden was the nominee. They had that Democratic base now, and now they're shifting to trying to win over independent voters, to focus on these battleground states and districts, and it is clear that it is working. Last night we had a special election. I talked about it earlier on this morning. Last night we had a special election in New Jersey's 10th district. Why is this important? Why are we talking about this? Well, what we saw here was that Democrats seen a massive overperformance from 2022, a 7-point shift to the left. On top of that, a 3-point shift to the left from 2020. Even if it wasn't a shift, if Democrats were just to be on par with Biden's 2020 performance, that would be substantive too. Why? Because there's a non-incumbent here who's running in this election compared to an incumbent in 2022 who did 7 points worse. And it also is a special election with an incumbent president who's down 14 points in national approval. And a race here that, based on the national average, even the Fox News poll, is about 4 points closer in the national polls than it was in 2020. And yet, in the actual elections that we are seeing, Democrats do well. Remember New York's 3rd? Remember the New York other special elections, what we saw in a number of these down ballot races, the state legislative special elections? Democrats are doing better in these swing districts and in these special elections, and that matters on the grand scheme of things. But this 20-point shift also might be a big reason why we're now starting to see Democrats do better in states like Pennsylvania. We just saw a poll showing Kamala Harris up 6. Now on the average, she leads by roughly 2. She now leads in Michigan by roughly 3, right? She now leads in Wisconsin, and she did have an advantage, but it was narrow. And a huge set of Midwestern polls out of these states, besides Emerson College, have relatively good news for the Democratic Party, if not really good news for the Democratic Party. And so I have really looked at a lot of the data points we have seen over the past 24 hours. And Fox News really strikes me as the most important to really cover at this point. 1, because it is a Fox News poll. It's high quality and it comes from Fox News. 2, the trend amongst independent voters here is something that we don't really get, or we aren't really able to see as much amongst other crosstab polls. And again, because they do these relatively often, we can really see the direct impact of the aftermath of that VP announcement. Kamala Harris being down 8 amongst independent voters, now up 12. That is massive, folks. I mean, we are looking at an election where that is a huge change. And while it may not translate to a massive change on the overall grand scheme of things, Kamala Harris is still, she's up for the first time ever in a Fox News poll, but she's still not at a point where this is a massive slam dunk on Donald Trump. Joe Biden clearly was polling better amongst independents back in 2020. But this gives Democrats room to work. And we have to remember, too, that 2020 isn't necessary to be replicated for Kamala Harris to win. The 2020 election results gave Joe Biden 306 electoral votes. I mean, that's something that matters, but it means there's room to fall. It means there are states to lose, and yet you can still win the election. And Democrats are coming to realize that. And I don't think they are going to lose many states either. I think we are in a very different age in the post-Roe v. Wade era. And Donald Trump certainly hasn't made it any easier for women across this nation to look at the issue of abortion and separate it. Donald Trump has not, in fact, gotten more centrist on the issue of abortion. Donald Trump's campaign has not, in fact, started to backpedal on some of their more extreme stances on this issue. And voters are not positively responding to that. And independent voters, which roughly 70% of them believe in Roe v. Wade as a decision from the United States Supreme Court and disagree with the Supreme Court's decision to overturn it, are likely driving those numbers that are giving Kamala Harris that bigger boost on the national scale and likely resulting in a net 20-point swing towards Kamala Harris, putting her in the lead for the first time in a Fox News poll since its inception for the 2024 election cycle. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server if you go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.